Around the Fence Post, where grit meets growth, stories spark change, and real conversations build stronger farms and futures.
Welcome back to Around the Fence Post. I'm your host, Jacob Leach. Joining us this week is Mr. John Chester from Martin, Tennessee. John has been out here since his college days from the eastern side of the state. He's farming with row crops, corn, beans, and wheat, I believe, as well as running a hay business that he does a really good job of. I know that when I started selling seed and started actually driving away from the farm to make sales instead of just waiting on people to show up and come and buy it. That was like the big name that I kept getting told to go find was, oh, you got to go talk to John Chester. He's the hay man out here. And John, we've done a little business over the years now. Really always enjoy talking to you and learning, and really excited to have you on to talk to you about your story, about how you got started out here and the business you've built and your philosophy around your forage program.
It's an honor to be asked to be with you this evening, and look forward to talking to you some, Jacob.
Well, let's start at the beginning. You were out here at UT Martin when you graduated, right? And you just stayed, or what did that all look like? Tell us the story from the beginning.
Sure. So I grew up in the Sweetwater Valley in East Tennessee, grew up on a dairy where my family at one time in the late 80s and early 90s had the largest registered Holstein herd in the Southeast. And I loved the forage side of the dairy, and I loved producing the crops, but I could care less about milking a cow. And UT Martin was just caught my eye at an early age when I started looking for colleges, because it was Western Tennessee, it was flat land, it was row crop country, and it gave me an opportunity to get away from the dairy and see a different part of agriculture. So I came to UT Martin and attended school here for 4 years, and started work when I came to school here for a family of the last name Fowler, and they offered me a full-time job when I graduated, and so I stayed on and worked with them. But I tell people all the time, what really kept me in West Tennessee was I fell in love with a little girl that didn't want to leave her mama. And she doesn't like it when I say that, but that's the truth. And was able to kind of begin farming on my own here while also working for another farmer. And it's been great. I've been here been here full time since 2000, so 26 years, and plus the 4 years in school is almost 30 years in August, and it's been great.
What were those early years like trying to get that going while you were working? And you were doing what? Were you paying people to custom work for you? You know, as far as doing your harvesting and things. How did that all look?
I was able to. Should have gone into this a little earlier, I guess, but was able to kind of work with another farming operation where I was paid for my labor with the use of their fuel, manpower, and equipment to plant and harvest my own row crops. Once I finally did acquire some land and start renting my own land, and then I had my wife's uncle had a pretty nice size at that time cow herd and some hay equipment and some things like that, and there were some farmers that had a need to get their hay harvested, and he made a deal with myself and my brother-in-law and said, you know, if you'll put my hay up, you can use the equipment to put other people's hay up. So it kind of got started in the hay operation by just doing custom work, and then it turned into, would you take care of this plot of land for me if and you can have the hay. And then it turned into, I don't want corn growing in my front yard anymore. Would you sow this down and put it in Bermuda grass or something like that? So it just kind of slowly morphed into a snowball that's going down the hill so fast now that I don't think I could stop it if I wanted to.
And that's very possible. And I appreciate that you're still so hungry about learning. Like that's one of the coolest things. We've of course just talked about our failed Timothy that didn't really work the way we wanted it to this past year, that you had gotten Timothy from me, and we had those water issues, and I'm chasing squirrels at this point. But that was like something that I just wanted to say, that on the heels of it, yeah, you're still growing and expanding and getting better, but it's also like a forward thing when there is a misstep. And that's something that I really appreciate from my side of it, because we are always learning. There's always so much more we can take away and figure out from there. When did the cows come along for you in your operation?
Cows came along in, I think, 2005. I rented a farm that was about half pasture and half row crop, and I was more interested in the land for the row crop aspect of the time, because I was eager to grow that part of my operation. But a landowner told me, he said, now you can cultivate all this if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend cultivating this part. And he made me a deal and sold me the cows with it. And I didn't realize until I owned those cows for about 6 months that, I really missed a cow. I enjoyed everything about a cow from my dairy days, except the monotony of milking twice a day and sometimes 3 times a day. And it didn't take me long to rekindle my love for livestock, especially cattle, and understand what they need. And then my love for forages kind of multiplied that, because there's nothing more I enjoy than trying to plant and harvest a forage and get it put up at the right time to have the right quality, so that you can feed those animals what they need and get out of them everything you can without having to supplement much.
What do you think that was your biggest takeaway from the dairy that you've brought into that forage side?
By far, it's the high moisture hay, haylage. It didn't take me long. That was probably I bought a wrapper, I guess, in 2003. And most people in West Tennessee at that time didn't even know what a wrapper was. There was a couple Mennonite families that had a wrapper, and they would do some custom wrapping for a few producers, maybe on a year where it was raining a lot and you couldn't get your hay up dry. Stepped out on a limb, and I went to an auction, I think, like I said, in 2003, to buy a tractor, and came home with a wrapper. And being able to grow a winter annual and have all of my forages put up for the year by this time, I've already put up all of my forages for next winter, and then be able to plant a soybean crop behind that has spelled profit for me, because I'm double cropping those acres, and I don't have acres tied up in strictly hay for my livestock. So I think that tool and that practice, the silage, going back to my dairy days, and the importance of a good grass for a forage silage, is probably the one thing that has helped me the most in my livestock as well.
You've seen both small scale and large scale operations. What lessons do you take away, translate across? So as you started and as you've built, what is something that you have just said, I'm always going to do it this way? Or now that you're at where you are, which is what I most would call a larger operation for this area in that business, what is something you would not do?
I think the number one mistake that we make in agriculture is saying that we're going to do it this way because that's the way we've always done it, or that's the way Daddy did it, or that's the way Granddaddy did it. I think that is the number one mistake that's made. And so I think, to answer that question, it's easy. You have to be always open to trying new things. You mentioned earlier my experience with the failed Timothy, and yeah, that was heartbreaking, but you're darn right, I'm going to try it again next year. A lot of people would just walk away from it and not want to try it again, because I think in agriculture, especially in production agriculture, the worst mistake we do, or the worst thing we do lots of times, is only remember what worked last year. Production agriculture, the agronomics and the things tied to it that we can't control will change the results of anything every year. And we can't give up on one practice or one method just because it didn't work. You got to keep trying until you've exhausted most of your practical resources and you see that it's not going to be a profitable adventure.
That one. So you and I just talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were working on that Bermuda. So you and I both know fertility is where a lot of producers either make money or lose it. What does a good fertility program look like to you?
Bermuda grass, I've learned the hard way that I have to apply 1 unit of potassium for every, or excuse me, 1.5 units of potassium for every unit of nitrogen. If I want my Bermuda stands to stay for any length of time, they have to be fed with potassium more than they're fed with nitrogen. The root structure, surviving winter kill through the winter, any of that is controlled by potassium from my experience in our soil type. It may be different in other parts of the region, but here in the soils that we have in Western Tennessee, if I don't continuously apply potassium, I lose a stand of Bermuda grass in no time. Magnesium, I've learned, is also very important, especially after the second cutting before the third, because that root uptake of magnesium, in my opinion, going into dormancy or at that time. And I only cut my Bermuda grass 3 times. Some people cut it 4, some even cut it 5, but because of our management style and how busy we get with harvest in the fall, it works best for me just to do 3 times. And so before my last application of nitrogen, I do also apply somewhere around 100 pounds of K-Mag, which is a product with sulfur, magnesium, and potassium. And I have seen a very big difference in green up the next spring and the way those Bermuda grasses survive winter kill with extra magnesium there late season.
That's a really good piece on the root development out of that, because I see it with potassium, and I'm a big fan of anything with sulfur coming in to help develop that root mass going into fall. Where do you see folks cutting corners that's going to bite them in the butt, especially on a year like this year with fertilizer costs being a little higher than the norm?
This year's tough. I think it's been pretty widespread, but as you know, we're experiencing a very significant drought, or in a big part of a drought here in Northwest Tennessee. Had high hopes last night for a big rain, and here in my area we only received about 4/10, and it makes it really tough right now to spend money on fertilizer as high as it is when you can't get the rainfall to get the benefit out of all that fertilizer. But I think it's one of those things you have to do. I mean, that's what we do in production agriculture, is we take chances and bet on the weather. Sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it does, but I just think when it comes to cutting corners, lots of people just, I'm just going to put nitrogen out this year, and that's fine. It sure does make that plant look good for a period of time, but you're not really giving it anything to replenish what's been removed if you've cut it, or if an animal has grazed on it. And what I've done to try to maintain a little bit is I've backed off on my nitrogen amounts that I have applied in the past, just so that I could afford a little more phosphate and potassium.
That's probably a lot better for the long-term health of the plant. That's a good call out, Mr. Chester.
And one other thing on that is I've always looked at my soil as a savings account, just like your savings account at your local bank. I feel like that if I apply DAP or potash or phosphate or potassium, whatever you want to call it, or even some of those minors, boron and magnesium along the way, I feel like in our soil types they do a pretty good job staying there until that plant needs it to take it up. And it's kind of like your savings account. You put that fertility out there, those elements are going to be there when that plant needs them. So if it, where your nitrogen can leach and move on, some say phosphate can do that, and I've used, the Avail or the PMAX, those type add-on products, and I think there's some benefit to them. And I continue to use those, but I also think that I feel like when I spend the money on those items, even when it costs a lot, that money's not just leaving my checking account. It's going into my savings account that happens to be my soil.
That's a great segue to the next question about soil testing, because that obviously plays into that cation exchange capacity in your organic matter to be able to retain that. And I would venture to say that because I love the mindset, but some of this soil that may be farmed to the point of being rather light in the area may not be holding on to those nutrients quite as well. So with that, let's touch on the your soil sampling philosophy.
I'm a grid guy. Depending on the size of the farm, it depends on how big the grid is. And a lot of people would argue with me on that. All of my alfalfa is gridded on 1 acre grids just because I think the payback there is huge because the fertility requirement there is very high. And if I sample on a 1 acre grid and that there's an acre that doesn't need as much potassium, it doesn't get it, and it saves me money just by doing that. And also, really, I think the payback on grids just comes in the pH adjustment alone and the cost of lime, because some of those grids, and I've been grid sampling for several years, and it's been very fascinating to see a farm that was managed by a different producer that I've taken over. And when I start gridding, it may take 10 years, but you can see those areas balance out, and you can see everything equalize over a period of time when you use those grids to manage each soil type. So, but that's what works for me, and I absolutely wouldn't do anything else but grid sample.
You see a huge discrepancy like that on alfalfa as well, that you might be the first person I've talked to that does it on alfalfa. I like that idea.
Yeah, I grid my alfalfa every August after the fourth cutting. I apply 70% of my fertility needs up front, March or February. I apply the other 30% after the second cutting. For the rest of the year, my philosophy on that's always been that I feel like 70 or 80% of your yield on alfalfa comes from the first two cuttings. So I've split that application between 70 and we pull. Alfalfa doesn't like traffic, so that's part of the reason I do it that way, so I can manage my traffic a little bit better. So I'll pull grids right after the fourth cutting as soon as we remove the bales, and then after the fifth cutting, just as soon as the bales are gone, we're in there with a lime truck before there's any regrowth, so we don't harm those root masses or anything any more than we have to with those heavy lime trucks. And we lime every year regardless to 7.0 on a pH, and the grid sampling, in my opinion, pays alone on lime alfalfa, because I've been able to manage alfalfa stands for 7 and 8 years in our environment, and I attribute a lot of it to the maintaining that pH right there at a 7.
So not only are you making the money work on where it makes sense as far as your soil's level setting across the field, and you have some spots you don't have to put down, so the balance sheet looks better there, you're also getting more bang for your buck when it comes to seed cost, as far as you don't have to be planting as often because you're maintaining a healthier root system and keeping your forages alive longer.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That makes it pencil a lot easier, and I never thought grid sampling was all that expensive for the value it brings to start with. Right now, at the price of fertilizer, if you could save, it doesn't take you very long to save that. What is it, $8-9 an acre is what they used to say. I don't know what it is now, but it wasn't a lot.
I'm paying my guys. They were at 11 last fall, and that sounds high, but That's also a full, what I call a full deal sample. That's all the micros, soil type analysis. What's available in the soil, what it needs for the next crop. That's all the bells and whistles.
Yeah, for one of those higher end samples that'll get into all that, that's not a bad price. I know the one company that I had to pull soil samples and send off for someone, and I don't do that a lot, but I'd gotten, somebody that was an absentee owner asked me to go do it, so I did this for a job, and it was like a $450 sample they wanted pulled, and I was like, Okay. Obviously, you learn stuff as you go. So, what was the biggest faux pas as far as your fertilizer, like to get this dialed into what you're doing? Like, it sounds like you've got a system that you're really pleased with. Like, there's not saying this you'll always do things the same way, but it sounds like you've got a good system with a base in place that you've been using for a long time. Was there a time in there where it was, well, this year things are tight, or this year things are this, that you might have made a swing and a miss?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to my statement earlier on Bermuda grass. We started establishing Bermuda grass by sprigging back in, I guess we sprigged our first Bermuda grass in 2002. Fortunately, came in where there was some row crop where fertility levels were really high to start with. There was lots of P and K already in that savings account, as I mentioned earlier. And we just went out there with nitrogen for a couple of years, and I mean, we got along great. It was clicking along, and square bales were leaving the field left and right on baling days. I mean, they were lined up down the road 5 or 6 trucks deep just to come in to get loaded. And we just thought, this is awesome. And then a couple, had one of those late falls where we got a lot of good regrowth and went in and I'm gonna steal another cutting here. And I never will forget it. We mowed some hay, mowed some Bermuda grass in late October, and baled hay on Halloween Day, and it was the prettiest Bermuda I've ever put up in my life. No humidity, dried, just beautifully green, and came back the next year, and there wasn't anything there. Um, so, winter kill got that stand, but when I started doing a good soil test analysis afterwards, I realized that I did two things wrong. Number one, I cut late, but number two, I had not replenished that savings account enough to allow that Bermuda grass to survive the winter. Well, so that was my first big lesson in Bermuda, and I was young and naive then, and that's when I learned potassium was to Bermuda grass, especially late season. And I've been a stickler ever since on making sure we were 1.5 units of potassium to 1 unit of nitrogen.
That's a good learning lesson. I should have asked that in the right order, but that's a really good piece. I want to pivot to the hay industry. Like I said when we came on in the introduction, you're known as the hay guy. Like it doesn't, anybody mentions hay up here, your name comes up. That's very very true, and you've done a lot over the last 30 years to obviously build that reputation. I'm really looking forward to it. I've wanted to have this conversation with a couple of people that are in the hay business, and then when you reached out, and that was just great timing, that whole thing, because I was like, I need to have one soon, and you reached out, so I'm really really tickled to get you with this, and then really start asking these questions, because I think quality hay, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for quality made hay that's not just looks pretty or this or that, but actually has quality because it's being fed through that fertility program you just mentioned. But now, talking about being able to put it up in Northwest Tennessee where we have humidity, we've got, just a lot of weather challenges, it seems like, to get well made dry hay, and all of those additional challenges. What's your approach to getting that timing and quality the way it needs to be?
Approach on that's just a lot of it's just a little experience. I said what worked last year may not work this year, but you still got to have a base to that. You can't always throw last year out of the way, but you still got to remember the 2 and the 3 and the 4 years before that. But, you know, you learn that, I guess, in my opinion, GDUs have a little bit more to do with the growth of a crop than the days. Lots of people used to say, well, I cut my Bermuda every 32 days, regardless, or every 28 days. But alfalfa has taught me that, it may be a shorter time period between third and fourth cut because you had a good inch of rain and it's been 95, 98 degrees with warm nights, and things get accelerated in that area. And so I don't necessarily follow a strict cutting schedule to maintain consistent quality. I just scout regularly and just trust my intuition when it comes to the weather. I tell people all the time, it seems like that these forecasts on our phones, it doesn't matter which app you use, I'm not sure they're worth the battery power that it takes to look at them. Sometimes, I know, for instance, we were supposed to have 2 inches yesterday for 10 days, and then 20 minutes before the storm comes, we're only going to get 3/10. So they change it so fast, it's almost like you can't trust it. But I'm not sure that I've really answered your question. You may need to kind of come back at me with a few more specifics, but I don't know that I have any strict plan other than just what feels right when it comes to getting hay put up.
I think you're right, and I just actually last week's episode it just released today with a nutritionist, John Winchell, out of Alltech. He works for Alltech. He's out of New York, so a dairy guy. But he was talking quite a bit about the growing degree days, to your point about the GDUs and how they affect your growth more so than the actual number of days. I'm just commenting. It wasn't anything I want to weigh in on. It's interesting you guys both touched that. So what do you think? And again, I know two within 40 miles of you that are either done or getting ready to be done in the hay business. So I know obviously just like most of farming, margins are tight. But I feel like quality overrides all of it. Is that your sentiment when it comes to hay producers?
Without a doubt. An old man told me one time, and I've never have forgotten, there's so much truth to it. He said, hay will always be too high to buy and too cheap to sell. It will always be that way. But if you produce quality, if you produce quality, your customers will overcome the price. It may take a while, and it has taken a long time for me, and it still takes a long time because I'm not the cheapest guy around by any means, and sometimes I feel like I sell my products too cheap. But to create new business, sometimes that's what you have to do a little bit along the way, while also being fair to those customers that have been with you for years. But I think if you want to stay in the business, you have to produce a product that allows a customer to have confidence in your product, and quality is what gives them that. And secondly, it has to be a product good enough that they realize that they don't have to supplement, that they can just feed your forage to their animal, and their animal can use that forage to do what they need to do to produce offspring, be healthy, and maybe perform in the arena if it's a horse owner, doing whatever they're doing. So you're right. I firmly believe quality is what keeps you in business.
What do you think the biggest misconception people might have about the hay business is? Whether it be about the people in the hay business or hay business in general. What do you wish your customers knew?
There's a lot of things. I think the first thing that comes to mind is every year about this time, I have customers texting me or calling me and telling me what they're going to need this year and putting in their orders. And I start keeping a list, and I know, but so many of them will call and say, hey, I got second cut last year off of this field and it was great. I want second cut off of that same field this year. And I explained to him, I said, well, that's fine. I'll be happy to do that. But you have to understand that the agronomics this year are going to make that hay completely different than it was last year. Third cut may be better, first cut may be better. We're in the process of putting up first cut alfalfa right now, and I'll be honest, it's some of the very best first cut I have ever put up in my life, and typically never put first cut up in squares because we don't have the weather to do it. But it's been so dry, we've got the weather to do it, and I'm not sure that if we don't start getting rain, this won't be the best cut I put up all year. And I never get first cut in squares. So I think the biggest misconception is customers think they have to have what was the best for them last year. That's what I try to convey to them every year, but lots of times people just don't understand how the weather, how a farmer can do everything right. He can fertilize correctly, he can cut correctly and get it baled correctly, but if the growth stage in between the last cut and this one, everything makes it different.
I think that's a really interesting one. I don't think I'd really thought about customers asking for coming off of the same field, but I can definitely see that. I can see them wanting it, and I can almost see why. So I already know which way you're going to lean on this based on the way you've answered the other questions, but I'll say it just for posterity's sake. Quality versus yield.
Well, you might think and I push the envelope a little harder on that on a product that I'm going to keep for myself. For instance, some of this early season, these winter annuals, the baleage that we've put up in the last 2 or 3 weeks, everybody says, this was the way it was when I grew up on the dairy at home. If you had a wheat field or ryegrass field or whatever, triticale, whatever it may be, oats, alongside the driveway, and you were going to town, and the flag leaf was out. You stopped every time you went to town to check to see if you were right in the boot stage. The head was about to split the shaft there, and if it was there, you turned around, went back and got you more, no matter the weather, and you went to cutting. And that's supreme quality, and that's what the dairy industry needs. But you've also got to have a little tonnage to make things profitable as well. And you can't completely concentrate on quality. And so if it's something that I'm putting up that I know I'm going to sell, I'm going to push for more quality. But if it's something that I'm going to keep myself to feed my cow herd, granted, my beef cattle herd, my registered Angus herd is a little different than the dairy side, because the nutrient requirements there aren't as great as they are a lactating cow all the time. But anyway, I may have surprised you there, but it's tricky. Sometimes you kind of got to manipulate that process to whatever is best for you, even though I may not concentrate on quality when it comes to something that's my own, because I need the tonnage.
I think that absolutely makes sense. I've talked about it on a couple of these leading up to now because of the time of year, obviously, but you called out something really important there, and that's just the nutrient requirements of the animal you're feeding. And it does change that. It does change that entire equation for even your customers if they're looking at it from that perspective. What a beef cow needs, a late gestation beef cow versus a fresh beef cow that's feeding a calf, and it's still not a huge protein percentage. It's not a major nutrient requirement as far as you can really kind of shoot the gap and get both and put away some still good quality, decent quality, to your point, kind of in that doe stage range on a lot of these, especially those fall calving herds, and then you get a doe stage in the spring and feed through the summer and fall months. Anyway, I'm just over here rambling. I've done that on a few of these.
Your comments are right on point. I mean, that's kind of been my philosophy, and that's what really shifted me to growing alfalfa years ago. I mean, for a long time, people said, you can't grow alfalfa in Northwest Tennessee. People have tried for years and it doesn't work. I have all of my beef cows are fall calving, almost 100 cow calf, 100 mama cows, 100 brood cows, and a calf September and October. And I had a field of hay that I'd always cut for hay that needed to be sowed down, reestablished, and I got to figuring what it was going to cost to do the old traditional West Tennessee orchard grass, fescue, and red clover. And I wonder what it's going to cost me just to plant straight alfalfa. And I could plant straight alfalfa for a little bit more per acre, and it was Roundup ready. And so, I can keep the weeds and the grasses out of it, make it pure, where it's always a battle with a three-way mix like that to keep it pure. And I started growing alfalfa so I would have a better quality forage to feed those lactating beef cattle through the wintertime, that I could work in as basically I supplemented a higher protein feed with some lesser quality feed so that I could manage that diet of that animal and still give them what they need. It surprised me. I can't remember the numbers exactly how much money I saved in a feed bill the first year I did that, because I didn't supplement those animals with any grain all winter. I allowed the alfalfa to do it. That kind of morphed into, people driving by say, I see you raising alfalfa. You gonna put any of that in a square bale? Well, then the next thing you know, I've got 100 acres of alfalfa in rotation, and the first cutting is all made for baleage for my cattle, and then everything else is baled and sold.
Cash crop. I like that. And it makes sense. That just makes sense. What's your take on the hay market right now?
Well, fortunately, where I am and where I produce hay, I feel like I've always been able to somewhat just create my own hay market. It has been a little bit more of a battle the last couple of years because Western hay has gotten extremely cheap. The Chinese kind of came out of the market and quit buying the pressed hay out in Washington and Oregon, and they were buying a lot, putting it in containers and taking it. And about 3 years ago, they quit that, and then that tanked the alfalfa market out west and made it a lot easier for folks to bring in that Western alfalfa that's so hard for us in the Southeast to compete with because of the humidity that we have. But never went up on price the last couple of years, but I've been able to be stable and also kind of compete with that. But now, from what I understand, out in the West, that the water issue is a big problem, and even heard from a friend of mine that the water district that he has a producer is in out there, that they're actually going to pay him a lump sum of money not to use any water this year, and so there's and he's not going to cut or bale any hay. He's just going to get paid to sit at home and not have to battle it. And so I think the hay market's probably going to get, the quality hay market is, from what I hear, going to get very tight. I think there's a drought out in Colorado and out in the West a little bit, and I don't know where it's going or what it's doing, but as far as I've been concerned, I've just been able to maintain the prices that I was comfortable at, having a little profitability and also being able to make affordable for my customers, because what's been the most important thing to me is my customers and those customers that come back every year. You'll always get new customers on a year where hay is tight, but the ones that come back every year are the ones that I want to take care of first.
Yeah, that is a great call out. What is it, that old saying, dance with the ones that brought you?
That's exactly right.
But yeah, I think and I, some of the groups I'm in and stuff, I've seen some of those conversations. I didn't know about any buyouts as far as to keep people, so I haven't seen that. That was news to me. From the flip side of that perspective, knowing that most of the country, with the exception of Wisconsin, is in a drought. That's a little bit enough to make you nervous. A little ironic when you look at last year and kind of the way the Southeast was with hay in general. There was just hay everywhere, and very little of it was really good quality. And then it just started being where people were only taking 2 cuttings, and then they just stopped doing anything. Of course, it got dry last fall too, but now we're going to be hurting for it, where typically a lot of times till the fall of the year, we only see that in Texas and maybe Oklahoma, where they're really scratching for hay. And if things don't, like you mentioned earlier, with 4/10 out of that rain we were supposed to get last night, if that don't kind of shift, we're going to be hurting pretty early here in the Southeast. And I don't mean that to be all gloom and doom. It's just a different year. We always get new opportunities presented on how the year is going to be.
Now, I've always been told that one extreme follows another. We were definitely this time last year on one extreme of the spectrum. When we had our annual rainfall here in Northwest Tennessee, we usually get about 52 inches, and I think by July 1st we'd had like 64, 65, and had 2 big 7-inch rain events at one time, one in February and one the first week of April. And so we were swimming everywhere we went. And now we've shifted to that other extreme where I just looked after last night. I mean, I've had 6 inches of rain for the year here, where this time last year I was well into 50. So it's completely different, and it's going to require us to manage completely different as well.
It's a good way to frame that up. On the heels of that, this will be a fun answer to look at. What advice would you give someone looking to break into the hay business, if there's any out there?
I think the biggest advice I would give anybody breaking into the hay business right now is, and it's hard to do on a year like this because you need the tonnage, but cut it as high as you can stand to cut it. Somebody told me years ago that your roots on a grass crop are only as deep as it is tall. When you cut that crop off, those roots shrivel up and die because it doesn't have the requirement to feed a plant that's not near as large because you just harvested it. And so I think one thing that I also didn't learn till almost too late is, it's pretty to see a fresh cut field that's been cut nice and low and looks like a golf course, but it's going to bite you on a year like this if you don't cut it high enough to maintain that root zone to allow that plant to survive and also get some regrowth. As far as breaking into the business, that's I tell people all the time, you can be successful at anything if you're providing a product or a service that no one else wants to provide. And so I would suggest to anybody that's interested in getting into the hay business is to find a way to do something that nobody else is doing. I mentioned earlier, I started that with a hay wrapper years ago. Nobody else had one. That kind of got me out there and gave me a tool or a piece of equipment that nobody else had, that I spent a lot of nights, all night on the road, running around wrapping hay for other people because I was the only guy at that time, and worked myself to death. But it also allowed me to develop some clientele that I still work with today, whether I just custom bale dry hay or sell them dry hay. So doing something that nobody else does and being successful at that will get you further in the beginning than anything else I can think of.
I like that a lot. A quick one, and I heard this one actually on a different podcast today, and I like the framing of it because it's not something that I think a lot of us look at. But what is something you have changed your mind on in the last 5 years?
Something I've changed my mind on in the last 5 years. I don't know that I've changed my mind, but something that I've been forced to do that's been very good for me is do a better job paying my help. My employees do a lot for me, a lot that I ask, and that's the one thing that comes to my mind is, and I'm also an employee, and the older I've gotten, for a long time, everything I made, I reinvested into my business, but I've also learned that I have to do a better job paying myself, because that's, we're all here to make money, but we also have to love what we do. But if you can't pay yourself, you and your family are going to be miserable in the long run, because number one, you're gone so much working and you're not with them. But I think that's one thing that probably has changed a little bit for me. But of course, the economy has forced me to also do that. But I've also realized that I got to do a better job taking care of the people that take care of me.
I like that one a lot. Being part of, I think I always thought, because I've worked, W-2 jobs, and I've always thought, it's really cool being part of a really good team, and that'd be my number one priority. But it makes it even better when the paycheck's sweeter.
You want your employees to be happy with what they're doing because you want them to want to come to work every day, but the best way to appreciate them is to pay them.
Yeah. I like that. I like that mindset with it. And of course, you've got Lake, and I met him, of course, right? Your son, is that his name? He came up and got seed last year. And you've got a daughter, right?
Yep, that's right. Lake, my son, he's 18. He graduated from high school in 2 weeks, and he's going to go to school here at UT Martin, and doesn't want to go off to school because he still wants to be active on the farm and really loves that. And it's awesome to have your son working with you. That's something I've always looked forward to and love every day of. And then my daughter, She is at the University of Knoxville or University of Tennessee at Knoxville. She's a junior there and very involved on campus. And she kind of went back to East Tennessee to go to college for the same reason I came over here too. I didn't mention it earlier, but I grew up there around Sweetwater and Athens, and my parents were both graduates of UT Knoxville, and so we always went to Knoxville, went to Ag Days and went to football games. And I just felt like if I went to Knoxville to go to school, that I was always going to be Rick and Pat's son. And my daughter Mariana, she's gone to Knoxville now because she didn't want to be John and Mary Margaret's daughter. She wanted to be Mariana. So it's been a pleasure to see her grow and thrive in an environment where we weren't present. It's really enjoyed that and excited for the opportunities that Lake has, and hopefully we can find a way to work him into the farming operation if he so chooses. Definitely not going to be one of those things that we force him to do, because I firmly believe that that's a life-changing decision that you have to be comfortable with, because not every day is an easy day and not every year is an easy year. But he's grown up in it, and we've done what we can to expose him to it, and it'll be his decision if he'd like to find a way to work his way in.
Very cool. And he definitely has a bright future in the conversation I had with him. That's tremendous. So extend my congratulations to him on graduating. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Him going to Martin, it'll keep you from being an empty nester. So look at that.
Well, his mother and I are kind of looking forward to a little bit of a break there, but we have missed his sister a lot, and it will be nice to have one a little bit closer to home. But we kind of also feel like we may see him less than we've seen her, so you never know how it works out.
That is a fair point. Well, John, I will wrap this one up. I appreciate you coming on around the fence post. I've had a lot of fun getting to know you a bit better and learning your story. Is there, I was going to ask if there's anything we can do for you on our end. Do you have a social media account or anything where Chester Farms or anything like that? Is that stuff out there, or is there not really?
Been active on Instagram. I don't know that I'm extremely active on social media, and I do have a TikTok account there. I think people can find me maybe J Chester Farms or Chester Farms or something like that. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but you can kind of find me there and see what we do there, see how things done, and I'll try to do a better job maybe updating some stuff on that along the way. But I look forward to getting some more Bermuda grass seed from you here in a few weeks, sometime after Memorial Day, and hopefully we have enough moisture to get that up and going. And I'm sure we're hopefully about to the point where we're going to switch extremes again and start getting wet. I know you're looking forward to that too.
It takes the whole thing. It's been such a weird spring where we've been moving a lot of summer annuals versus summer annuals early compared to most years, where typically we wouldn't be seeing this kind of turnaround on sorghums and things of that nature, and guys are planting. So it's just an odd year. But let me wrap the pod up, and then I'll bounce over to then I'll pause the recording. So thanks for joining us on Around the Fence Post, and thank you to Mr. Chester for coming on and spending an hour of his evening with us. And we will see you next time on Around the Fence Post.
As we wrap up today's episode, we hope something we shared helped you, challenged you, or gave you a new perspective. If even one moment stood out, please share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. That's how this community grows, one conversation at a time. You can find us as Around the Fence Post on Facebook and Wet Meadows Seed on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate you being here. We'll see you next time, Around the Fence Post.